Okay, let's go. Number 1. The White City. You're over Honduras in a small survey plane and it's 2012. Below you is 600 square miles of cloud forest in the Musquisha region, one of the densest, most inaccessible jungles in the Western Hemisphere. You're carrying LiDAR equipment, the laser scanning technology that strips away vegetation in computer rendering to show the bare ground beneath. The sensor is pointed down. The screen in front of you begins filling with shapes that don't belong to a forest. Grid patterns, causeways, the geometric footprint of plazas and pyramids spreading across the jungle floor in arrangements that could only be deliberate. You've just found the place that every indigenous tribe within 200 miles has refused to enter for generations. In the Pech language, its name doesn't translate as a city. It translates as the place you must not go. The White City, Ciudad Blanca, first appeared in Spanish colonial records in the 1530s when Hernán Cortés mentioned a province containing a settlement richer than Tenochtitlan. Subsequent accounts from indigenous informants described stone buildings whitened by mineral deposits, plazas filled with offerings, a city sealed from approach by jungle, so impenetrable that no 20th century expedition returned with definitive proof. The Honduran government searched, academics searched, private explorers searched. The Musquisha absorbed them without comment. The 2012 LiDAR survey by the University of Houston's National Center for Airborne Laser Mapping changed the situation entirely. The data showed not one city but a network of settlements connected by roads and causeways spread across the jungle basin in configurations that indicated sustained urban organization over an extended period. In 2015, a team led by archaeologist Chris Fisher of Colorado State University went in on foot. Here is what happened. Within 3 days, team members began showing symptoms. By the time the expedition ended, at least 4 researchers had contracted leishmaniasis, a parasitic disease spread by sandflies that produces flesh-eating lesions starting on the skin and, in its severe form, advancing into facial cartilage and soft tissue from the inside. Filmmaker Steve Elkins required months of intensive treatment. One team member developed mucocutaneous leishmaniasis, the variant that destroys the interior structures of the nose, mouth, and throat. 3 people who walked into this city came out needing reconstructive work. The indigenous Pech and Tawaka peoples had maintained an absolute prohibition against this jungle zone for as long as their oral traditions extend backward. They had never described it as merely dangerous. The word used translates closer to contamination than to curse, a distinction that matters. A curse implies something external was done to you. Contamination means you brought something back. What the Fisher expedition found before the medical emergency curtailed excavation was a cache of 52 stone artifacts in an offering deposit near the base of a major earthwork, ceremonial vessels, carved thrones, and animal-human hybrid transformation figures, humans mid-conversion into jaguars, serpents, and birds. The site predates the Maya structures, it superficially resembles, and the culture that produced it has no confirmed name in the archaeological record. The mainstream explanation for the illness is ecological coincidence. The Musquisha carries one of the highest sandfly densities in Central America. Any team camping there for multiple days ran this risk. The indigenous taboo almost certainly developed as tribal memory, encoding real biological danger in spiritual language. Nothing supernatural occurred. Here's where the coincidence argument fails. Biological surveys conducted after the expedition found that sandfly density inside the ruin zone was measurably higher than in the surrounding jungle. The ancient earthworks and standing water features had created ideal breeding habitat that persisted for centuries in the archaeological footprint. The city was not simply in a dangerous jungle. The city was producing the danger at a specific elevated level within its own boundary. The site remains largely unexcavated. Permits for follow-up work have been requested and slow-walked. The 52 artifacts were photographed and left in place. The jungle is closing back. Why does the ancient city produce concentrated biological hazard specifically within its own footprint? What culture built a networked city complex with no confirmed successor civilization? And why did every indigenous group within 200 miles preserve a consistent prohibition against entering it for at least 500 years, through conquest, colonization, and the present? Ciudad Blanca was abandoned, and its builders forgotten. 8,000 miles to the east, in the western Pacific Ocean, A civilization built something that may have been physically impossible to build, and when they abandoned it, every culture that came after refused to sleep there. Number 2. Nan Madol. You're arriving by boat to the eastern coast of Pohnpei, a volcanic island in the Federated States of Micronesia, and the first thing you see is not a shoreline, it's a wall. Basalt columns stacked horizontally in alternating layers, each one weighing between 5 and 50 tons, rising out of the tidal flats like the construction of a civilization that decided to build in stone the size of freight containers. Behind that wall is another, and another. Stretched across nearly 2 square kilometers of tidal lagoon are 100 artificial islands, each one assembled from interlocking basalt columns, connected by a network of canals that fill and drain with the tide. The total construction volume is approximately 750,000 tons of basalt rock. The nearest natural source of this specific columnar basalt is at the opposite end of Pohnpei Island, 25 to 30 miles away, across open Pacific Ocean. There were no roads on Pohnpei in 1200, no draft animals large enough to move stone, no wheeled vehicles. Engineering analyses by researchers at the University of Oregon calculated that moving and placing 750,000 tons of stone with available pre-industrial technology required a coordinated workforce of several hundred people operating continuously for several decades. Pohnpei's total population during the construction period is estimated at fewer than 30,000 people. Dedicating even 10% of an entire island population to a single project for 30 years without interruption would have consumed the whole surplus output of the island economy every year without exception. The city was built by the Saudeleur dynasty, which ruled Pohnpei from approximately 1180 until 1628, when a warrior named Izokelakel arrived from Koh Ker with 333 men and overthrew the last Saudeleur king. The Saudeleur are remembered in Pohnpeian oral tradition as powerful, cruel, and not entirely human in origin. The local account for how 750,000 tons of basalt arrived on artificial islands in a tidal lagoon credits a flying dragon named Nan Sapwe with transporting the columns through the air. Here is what makes the site genuinely strange beyond the engineering problem. Archaeological excavation of Nan Madol has produced no burials. None. The site served as the seat of a dynasty that ruled for approximately 450 years. Multiple generations of rulers, nobles, priests, and workers. Not one grave. Not one set of skeletal remains in a ritual context. What the Saudeleur left behind were ceremonial platforms and ritual enclosures, a city apparently built entirely for a function no academic study has definitively identified. German colonial surveyors documenting the site in 1910 recorded that their local workforce refused to remain on the islands after dark. The workers explained that the spirits of the Saudeleur persisted in the ruins, and that sleeping there without proper ceremony would result in illness and death. This was offered as practical field information, the kind a worker passes to a new colleague on the first day. Japanese colonial authorities attempted excavation in 1907. Workers quit after reporting nightmares and physical illness. The excavation was abandoned. UNESCO designated Nan Madol a World Heritage Site in 2016. The formal designation document uses the phrase, "still poorly understood" 4 separate times. A century of scholarly attention. 4 times in one document. That phrase, in writing produced by the world's leading heritage organization, means exactly what it says. Modern Pohnpeian communities avoid the islands after dark. This is not enforced by authorities or staged for tourism. It is an intact behavioral tradition extending from the Saudeleur era to the present, maintained through the overthrow of the dynasty, through German and Japanese colonialism, through American administration, and through independence. 800 years of continuous social change. The same behavior, unchanged. How did the Saudeleur move 750,000 tons of basalt across open Pacific water with a total island population of 30,000 and no mechanical advantage beyond muscle? What were they doing in a ceremonial city of 100 artificial islands from which they removed every single body? And why has every culture that has ever governed Pohnpei found the same avoidance behavior intact when it arrived, across 8 centuries without exception? Nan Madol was built on water. The next forbidden site exists underground, beneath hundreds of meters of jungle and rock in Ecuador, and the first man to walk on the moon described what he saw inside it as the most important event of his life. Number 3. Cueva de los Tallos. You're Neil Armstrong in 1976, and you've agreed to lead an expedition into the Ecuadorian jungle that has nothing to do with NASA. You've walked on the moon. You've held press conferences for presidents. But something a Hungarian businessman placed before the government of Ecuador in 1969 was compelling enough that when a 200-person British-Ecuadorian scientific expedition asked you to lend your name to it, you said yes. You're going 70 meters underground into a cave system in the eastern Ecuadorian jungle to verify the claim that inside this cave there exists a metal library. Thousands of inscribed metallic plates containing the complete history of a civilization that predates all civilization on record. Here's what makes the claim legally impossible to dismiss. János Moric, a Hungarian-born explorer living in Argentina, did not simply describe the metal library in interviews or write about it in a book. In 1969, he appeared before an Ecuadorian public notary and signed a legal notarial declaration, a sworn document with the same standing as sworn court testimony in a sovereign nation, in which he specifically claimed to have entered the Cueva de los Tallos in the Cordillera del Condor and found interior chambers containing metallic plates inscribed with text, geometric imagery, and what appeared to be cartographic material. He named the location. He signed his name. If the claim was entirely fabricated, it constituted criminal fraud under Ecuadorian law. Moric understood this. He signed anyway. The 1976 expedition assembled 200 people, British SAS soldiers, scientists from geology, biology, and archaeology, and representatives of the Shuar indigenous people, traditional custodians of the territory. Armstrong joined as honorary president. They descended and found the cave genuine and extraordinary, cathedral-scale chambers, network passages, the oil birds called tallos, nesting in the upper vaults, and producing grinding calls in the darkness, that early visitors consistently described as unsettling in ways they couldn't fully articulate. They did not publicly confirm the metal library. The official findings were never published as a unified scientific report. Individual participants published observations on geology and biology. No document from the 1976 expedition addresses the central question, Moric's metal plates, in any systematic way. The silence is not a refutation. It is an absence of documentation where documentation was explicitly promised. Armstrong gave one statement afterward, quoted in multiple subsequent accounts. The most important discovery of his life was not walking on the moon. It was what he witnessed underground in Ecuador. He offered no elaboration. He repeated the statement in at least 2 separate recorded contexts. He died in 2012 without explaining it. Scottish explorer Stan Hall, who organized the 1976 expedition, spent years investigating the cave system and published his findings in 2006. He documented inscribed stones in secondary chambers on subsequent visits, not metallic plates, but stone surfaces, bearing marks that his analysis described as deliberate rather than geological. He died in 2008. His work was never peer-reviewed. It was not refuted either. It was simply not engaged with by mainstream archaeology. The Shuar people maintain that the Cueva de los Tallos is a physical entrance to the realm where the knowledge of their ancestors is preserved. Access without Shuar permission is not governed by spiritual consequence in the abstract. In traditional Shuar law, entering Shuar territory without authorization is an offense for which the assigned penalty is physical death, administered by Shuar warriors. The Ecuadorian government has maintained restricted access since the 1970s. The Shuar law and the state restriction reinforce each other. The cave is genuinely inaccessible, and the inaccessibility has lethal backing. The mainstream position, the metal library, doesn't exist. Moric was a colorful figure whose claims were not corroborated by the scientific expedition organized to verify them. Armstrong's statement was misquoted or taken out of context. The cave is an impressive natural formation containing nothing archaeologically significant. But the notarial declaration is a real legal document on file in Ecuador. A 200-person scientific expedition went specifically to verify it and produced no unified report. The Armstrong, quote, appears in multiple independent sources. And the Ecuadorian government has maintained access restrictions on a cave that, by official archaeology's account, contains nothing of consequence. What did the first man to walk on the moon see underground in Ecuador that he ranked above walking on the moon? What exists in the unmapped interior sections the 1976 expedition didn't document publicly? And why maintain restricted access to a natural cave that the official record says is empty? Armstrong entered a forbidden jungle cave and never fully explained what he saw. A British Army colonel entered the Amazon jungle in 1925, searching for a city the scientific establishment said couldn't exist and never came out at all. Number 4. The Lost City of Z. You're Colonel Percy Harrison Fawcett in April 1925, and you are, by any reasonable measure, one of the most qualified people alive to be where you are. Royal Geographical Society Founders Medal. 3 prior Amazon expeditions without dying, which is not a trivial credential. You've mapped more South American interior than any other British officer. You survived the Somme. You are walking into the Mato Grosso with your 21-year-old son Jack and Jack's friend Raleigh Rimmel, following intelligence buried in a document so old its pages have turned to powder. The document is manuscript 512. It sits in the National Library of Brazil in Rio de Janeiro. A Portuguese colonial explorer wrote it in 1743, describing a ruined stone city he discovered in the Brazilian interior, plazas, arched gateways, an unknown writing system inscribed on the structures, a layout indicating deliberate urban planning by people who were long gone. He never returned. The document sat in the library for 180 years before Fawcett found it and decided it described a real place. He called it Z. He was right. None of the 3 men came out. Fawcett's last communication was a letter sent from his final camp, dated May 29, 1925. What strikes anyone who reads it, expecting the emotional register of a man walking toward death, is the tone. It is calm. He is not afraid. He believes he is close. The Royal Geographical Society organized follow-up expeditions. They found nothing. Over the following decades, more than 100 people died or disappeared, searching for Fawcett and his party. A Polish nobleman, American soldiers, journalists. The Amazon was consistent. In 2003, anthropologist Michael Heckenberger of the University of Florida published findings in Science. Working with the Kwikuro indigenous people of the Upper Xingu River, the same region where Fawcett disappeared, he documented a network of 19 pre-Columbian towns connected by road systems, plazas, and causeways. He named the complex Kuhikugu, population at peak, 30,000 to 50,000. The complex collapsed after European contact, smallpox moving ahead of the explorers themselves, reaching populations with no immunological history, killing between 80 and 90% before any European face appeared. In 2023, a joint UK-Brazilian LiDAR survey, published in the Journal of Computer Applications in Archaeology, added 26 additional sites to the network. The city Fawcett spent his life searching for existed, in the region he believed, at roughly the scale he estimated. He was a century ahead of the technology that would confirm it. The mainstream explanation for his death is statistical. The Amazon in 1925 was reliably lethal. Disease, hostile encounters, starvation, exhaustion. The 100-plus searchers who died after him died of the same causes. No mystery required. An experienced explorer misjudged conditions. It happens. But his final letter's calm has no parallel among expedition accounts from men who didn't come back. And among the Kwikuro people of the Upper Xingu, anthropologists conducting fieldwork in the 1990s recorded oral testimonies describing a fair-skinned outsider who lived among a local group beginning in the 1920s or 1930s and died of old age some years later. The descriptions, collected by multiple anthropologists independently, match Fawcett's physical appearance. If Fawcett found the city he was looking for and chose to stay, no rescue expedition would ever locate him. A person who dies in 1940 and is buried with indigenous ceremony leaves nothing that a British search party would recognize as a grave. What was in Fawcett's last camp that made him calm when he should have been afraid? Are the Kwikuro oral accounts of a fair-skinned man living among them in the 1920s and 1930s a reference to Percy Fawcett? And if the city he spent his life searching for actually existed, confirmed by satellite and laser surveys in 2003 and 2023. What else was this man right about that the scientific establishment told him was impossible? Fawcett was searching for a city built for the living. The next forbidden site was not built for the living at all. It was built as a machine for cosmic destruction, and an empire of 80,000 people completed it and abandoned it within a single generation. Number 5. Koh Ker. You're Jayavarman IV, in 921, king of the Khmer Empire, and you've just done something no ruler of your dynasty has done in 3 centuries. You've moved the capital 60 miles into the jungle to a site with no existing infrastructure, and you've ordered construction of the largest religious complex in Southeast Asia. Your architects have explained the cosmological purpose. This is not a capital in the conventional sense. It is a machine, specifically the instrument described in Hindu scripture for the dissolution of the current age. A place built for the cosmic event where Shiva performs the Tandava, the dance that unmakes reality. The construction took approximately 23 years. Then it was abandoned. Koh Ker sits in Preah Vihear province in northern Cambodia, surrounded by lowland forest that became one of the most heavily mined regions in the world during the Khmer Rouge era. The mines kept archaeologists out. They did not keep looters out. Between 1993 and 2008, while demining operations were ongoing, the site was stripped with industrial efficiency. Entire carved sandstone facades, pediments, lintels, centuries of artistic production were removed with power tools and sold through Thailand into Western art markets. The Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York and several other major institutions later returned Koh Ker sculptures after provenance investigations confirmed their origin in the looting period. What the looters didn't take, because it had no market value, was what a Cambodian French research team found in 2001 at the base of Prasat Tom, the central pyramid. An earthwork depression adjacent to the main structure contained human skulls in a deliberate spatial arrangement. 76 were recovered in the first excavation season. The estimated total deposit is several hundred. The skulls showed uniform cut marks on the cervical vertebrae, consistent with ritual decapitation by a large blade. The arrangement was not random, it was organized. The Saudalur built Nan Madol and left no bodies. Jayavarman IV built Koh Ker and filled it with them. Prasat Tom is a 7-tiered sandstone pyramid, 35 meters high, dedicated to Shiva as destroyer. Its form directly represents Mount Kailasa, the cosmic mountain in Hindu scripture where Shiva performs the Tandava, the dance that dissolves the current universe. The city of Koh Ker was designed from its inception as a ceremonial site for ending things. The skulls at its base were not incidental. They were the ceremony. The abandonment has no explanation in the Khmer record. In 944, within one generation of the city's completion, Jayavarman's successor moved the capital back to Angkor. The city was not sacked. The temples were not destroyed. Infrastructure was left standing. 80,000 people departed, and the jungle grew back around the empty city with patient precision. By the time Portuguese missionaries reached the Mekong Basin in the 16th century, Koh Ker did not exist in regional memory. The mainstream interpretation is administrative. Jayavarman seized power through a contested succession and relocated the capital to distance himself from entrenched factions in Angkor. When he died, his successor reversed the decision. The skulls represent ritual sacrifice consistent with Hindu royal consecration tradition. Nothing unusual happened here. Here's where the administrative explanation becomes insufficient. A contested succession doesn't explain 23 years of construction at this scale, or a pyramid architecturally coded as the instrument of universal dissolution at the center of the city plan, or the fact that no Khmer inscription from any subsequent period ever describes what happened at Koh Ker or why the site was left exactly as it stood. In Khmer epigraphic record, other events from this period are documented in detail. Koh Ker is not mentioned. A 2020 UNESCO LiDAR survey identified more than 1,000 additional structures in the jungle zone surrounding the excavated core. Most remain unexcavated. Local farmers who have cultivated land adjacent to the outer ruins for generations give one consistent observation when guides ask about the site. They do not approach the pyramid compound after dark. Not because of mines, the outer rural zones have been cleared. They say the area around Prasat Tom has a quality they describe as watchful. What happened at Koh Ker that caused one of history's most powerful empires to complete its capital and walk away from it in under 25 years. What was the full purpose of the skull deposit at the base of a pyramid built for cosmic dissolution? And what is in the 1,000-plus unexcavated structures in the surrounding jungle that no excavation team has yet examined? Koh Ker was abandoned by an empire without explanation. The Chachapoya of Peru abandoned their cloud city too, but they didn't leave it empty. They left it watching. Number 6. Gran Pajaten. You're Jean Savoy in 1963, and you have a specific relationship with impossible things. You've located more than 40 lost cities in South America, more than any other explorer of the 20th century. You found Vilcabamba, the last refuge of the Inca. You're at 2,850 meters on a jungle ridge in the Peruvian Andes. Cloud forest visibility measured in yards, the sound of the canopy constant and disorienting. Your feet are invisible below you. Then the forest opens slightly and you see the walls. Circular stone towers emerging from vegetation, their surfaces covered in geometric friezes cut with the precision of people who treated architecture as a moral obligation. And in those friezes, looking outward from the stone with expressions that require both human and animal categories simultaneously, are faces. Condors with human eyes, jaguars mid-transformation into men, eyes that have been pointing at this jungle for approximately 1,000 years. Gran Pajaten sits in what is now Rio Abiseo National Park in La Libertad, Peru. Access requires a 5-day trek from the nearest road and a government permit that is routinely denied. The city was built by the Chachapoya, a civilization the Inca called the Cloud Warriors, who occupied the cloud forest zone of the Peruvian Andes from approximately 900 until the Inca completed their conquest in 1475. That conquest took decades. The Inca absorbed civilizations across South America with documented military efficiency. The Chachapoya required what Inca chronicles describe as one of the most prolonged and costly campaigns in the empire's history. Every ridge had to be fought for. The facing figures on Gran Pajaten's walls have generated interpretive disagreement. Mainstream Andean archaeology reads them as ancestor cult representations, the dead watching over the living, a common theme across pre-Columbian cultures. Researchers who specialize in Chachapoya material culture read the orientation differently. Not the dead facing inward toward the city, but sentinels positioned to observe what approaches from outside the walls. The distinction is not academic. It changes what the city was designed to do. The burial tradition clarifies the intention. The Chachapoya place their dead in cliff-face stone burial cases, mummy bundles wrapped in painted clay shells shaped to resemble a standing human figure, and position them on vertical cliff faces in groups oriented east toward the sunrise, arranged by apparent social affiliation. Thousands of these cliff burials exist across the Chachapoya zone. The dead were not stored, they were stationed. Here's where it gets strange. The Spanish colonial records describing the Chachapoya made anthropologists uncomfortable for generations. Cieza de Leon, writing in the 1540s, described them as tall, with lighter skin than other Andean peoples, and culturally distinct from every surrounding civilization. The description was historically dismissed as colonial exaggeration. It became significantly harder to dismiss after a 2015 study published in Nature examined genetic data from Chachapoya skeletal remains and found a distinct ancestry that does not map cleanly onto any other South American population group. Not a minor variation. A distinct ancestry. Where they came from has not been established. The question is open in the scientific literature, unresolved. After the Inca conquest, Spanish forced resettlement policies dispersed the Chachapoya population across the empire. Their cities were abandoned. The cloud forest grew back over Gran Pajaten so thoroughly that the site was invisible to systematic inquiry until Savoy found it in 1963. The 1985 excavation season found offering deposits containing deliberately smashed ceramics and textile fragments bearing iconography that researchers spent years attempting to place within known Chachapoya traditions. They couldn't. The imagery appeared to reference an astronomical event and depicted figures in configurations suggesting organized withdrawal, preparation for departure rather than habitation. The city had not been abandoned in crisis. Evidence suggests it was vacated with deliberate intention, significant objects removed, the watching figures left in place. The Chachapoya didn't just abandon their city. They arranged it for a long absence before they left. Who were the Chachapoya, and what is the origin of a genetic ancestry still unresolved in the scientific literature? What astronomical event does the Gran Pajaten offering deposit reference? And why did a civilization that held the Inca at bay for decades station their dead as sentinels, face their walls outward, and leave their city arranged as if expecting something to eventually return? The Chachapoya hid in the clouds. A civilization that was 10 times larger hid in plain sight in the flat Amazon basin and was invisible to Western understanding until a laser in an airplane finally looked down. Number 7. The Amazon earthworks. You're carrying a LiDAR sensor over the Llanos de Mojos in eastern Bolivia, and it's 2022. The system strips the jungle canopy away in the data stream, reducing the forest to a point cloud, and what appears beneath is architecturally impossible for a civilization that wasn't supposed to exist here. Causeways, raised platform mounds, artificial forest islands at regular intervals, fish ponds connected by canal networks, geometric earthworks, circles inscribed within squares inscribed within larger circles, covering ground at scales visible only from altitude, cut into laterite bedrock with tools the soil record cannot identify. One survey region, 4,500 square kilometers, 11,000 individual earthwork sites. The Ekin-Anzan Basin was understood, for most of Western academic and popular history, as empty land, pristine wilderness, capable of supporting only small mobile forager populations, but not complex settled civilization. The jungle was too poor, the soil too thin, the flooding too unpredictable. The great pre-Colombian civilizations were in the highlands, the Aztec, the Maya, the Inca. The Amazon was nature unspoiled by human organization. This was the established consensus. It was wrong. The 2022 survey, conducted by a UK-Brazilian research team led by archaeologist Umberto Lombardo and published in Science, documented the Casarabe culture operating at urban scale across eastern Bolivia from approximately 500 to 1400. The earthworks include 2 large urban centers with ceremonial architecture and a distributed settlement network connected by raised causeways up to 22 kilometers long. The hydraulic agricultural system supported a population researchers estimated in the hundreds of thousands. This was only Bolivia. In the Brazilian state of Acre, deforestation beginning in the 1990s exposed something beneath the cleared ground that nobody expected: geoglyphs. Geometric earthworks in the shapes of squares, circles, hexagons, and octagons, up to 300 meters across, cut into the laterite bedrock. More than 500 have been identified across 13,000 square kilometers. Radiocarbon dating places their construction between 1200 BC and 1283, maintained across approximately 2,500 years. They are only visible from the air. Only the deforestation of the 20th and 21st centuries removed the 4 centuries of vegetation that had hidden them from anyone standing on the ground. When population estimates for the Amazon basin at 1,500 are compiled from all these sources, the number reaches 8 to 10 million people living in organized agricultural civilizations. By 1600, the estimate is approximately 1 million. The difference between 8 million and 1 million happened in roughly 50 years. European introduced diseases, moving ahead of European explorers themselves, reached populations with no immunological history of smallpox, measles, or influenza, and killed between 80 and 95% of them before most of those populations ever encountered a European. Cities that had supported tens of thousands were abandoned in a single generation. The jungle, which the human population had actively managed and cultivated for centuries, reverted. In 400 years, it grew back so completely that the explorers who came looking saw only pristine wilderness. The cover story held because the cover was alive. The mainstream archaeological response is not to dispute the LiDAR data, it's unambiguous, but to note that the interpretive framework is still being revised. The standard consensus was incorrect and is being corrected. This is how science works. No suppression, an incomplete picture being updated with better tools. But the Acre geoglyphs introduce a problem the revision doesn't resolve. They were built to be perceived from above. The geometric precision, circles inside circles, repeating across 13,000 square kilometers, in consistent patterns, is only coherent as design when viewed from altitude. The people who built them spent 2,500 years cutting these forms into bedrock. They had no aircraft. They had no elevated vantage point over the Amazonian plain. The intended audience for these constructions was not standing on the ground. Who were they building for? What was the full extent of Amazon civilization before the 90% collapse that erased it inside a century? Why do the acre geoglyphs require an aerial perspective that the people who built them could not access? And among the living indigenous communities whose ancestors built these cities, communities that have no oral tradition of the civilization because the collapse severed cultural memory entirely, is there anything recoverable of what was known before the jungle grew back? An empire of millions was erased by disease, and the jungle became its tombstone. The Inca Empire was smaller, but its last refuge was protected by something more durable than stone: living memory, deliberately maintained, in a forest that still has people in it. Number 8. Paititi. Your Tupac Amaru in 1572, the last Sapa Inca, and the Spanish have been trying to kill you since before you were born. Your brother Titu Cusi died unexpectedly 2 years ago. Poisoning is the most likely explanation. The Spanish denied it with the consistency of people who have something to deny. The jungle refuge at Vilcabamba is surrounded. Viceroy Francisco de Toledo is organizing the final campaign. There are no more mountains, but there is one more city, east of the Andes, deeper into the forest, in a direction that even the best Spanish cartographers leave blank. The priests carried the gold there when Cusco fell. You know this because it was told to you the way things are told that are meant to outlast the person telling them, carefully, in specific terms, in the language of something designed to survive the current moment. Tupac Amaru was captured in June 1572 and publicly executed in Cusco. Vilcabamba was occupied by Spanish forces and found to contain far less wealth than expected. The gold that had accumulated in Cusco over 5 centuries of Inca imperial power, documented in Spanish chronicles as vast by any measure, was not there. Where it went has not been established. The Paititi legend is specific enough to be distinct from El Dorado, the Colombian origin myth about a golden king. Paititi appears in early colonial Andean sources as a geographic location, east of the Andes, in the jungle lowlands, containing a stone city and significant stored wealth. Multiple 16th and 17th century Spanish expeditions searched for it. Gonzalo Pizarro's 1541 expedition numbered 4,000 people and penetrated the eastern jungle for months. Roughly half died. He returned with nothing, and in a state contemporary accounts described as barely coherent. In 2001, Italian archaeologist Mario Poglia was working in the Vatican secret archives when he found a document written in 1600 by Jesuit missionary Father Andrea Lopez. The document described conversations with indigenous informants who gave detailed accounts of a city called Paititi, stone buildings with walls bearing gold and silver inlay, located east of the Andean Cordillera, accessible via specific jungle river systems that Lopez named. The geographic references correspond to real landmarks in the Madre de Dios River basin of southeastern Peru. Poglia published the document. Coverage outside specialist journals was minimal. In 2009, French-Peruvian explorer Thierry Jamin located a sealed stone doorway in the Madre de Dios jungle, fitted stone blocks in a deliberate arrangement, identifying a sealed entrance to a subsurface complex. He applied to Peru's Ministry of Culture for an excavation permit. Denied. He applied in 2010. Denied. In 2011. Denied. The ministry cited procedural reasons. Additional preliminary survey required, while commissioning no preliminary survey of its own. In 2019, a LiDAR survey of the Madre de Dios region identified geometric anomalies adjacent to Jamin's reported location. A preliminary report was published. A full analysis has not been released. The Matsajenka and Machiganga indigenous communities in the region have been interviewed by anthropologists since the 1990s. Their accounts describe a city in the interior that community members do not visit. The explanation given is not spiritual in character. No spirits, no curse. They describe a social reality. The people in the interior prefer not to have contact. The phrasing is consistent across multiple interviewers and informants. Not that there is no one there. Not that no one knows. that the people there have chosen to remain absent. The mainstream position, the gold is almost certainly gone, melted down in the post-conquest period, dispersed, or misrepresented in sources that conflated several sites into one legend. Jamin's doorway may be an unrelated, pre-Columbian structure. The permit denials reflect bureaucratic caution, not suppression. The Matsagenka testimony refers to genuinely isolated communities with no connection to Inca history. But the Vatican document is a 400-year-old missionary account with specific geographic references. The permits were denied 3 times without any government follow-up investigation at a site that, by the ministry's own logic, warranted preliminary survey. And the Matsagenka testimony about living people who have chosen to remain absent is the kind of information that appears in field notes, quietly, and not in press releases. The gold may be gone. The silence isn't. What is behind the sealed stone entrance in Madre de Dios? Why did Peru's Ministry of Culture deny 3 excavation permits without commissioning any alternative investigation? And are the Matsagenka describing an isolated community with no connection to the Inca, or a continuous, deliberate absence extending all the way back to 1572 and a last Sapa Inca who knew exactly what needed to survive? Paititi may be guarded by living people who chose to disappear. The next forbidden city was not guarded by anyone. It was so completely consumed by jungle that an empire controlling 1 million square kilometers vanished from human memory inside a single century, and the people who came after never knew it had existed. Number 9. Calakmul. Your Cyrus Lundell, in 1931, a botanist conducting aerial surveys for the United Fruit Company over the Campeche region of southern Mexico, and you're seeing something that isn't on any map. Below you is unbroken jungle to every horizon. You've been flying for hours. Then, 2 shapes emerge above the canopy that belong to no botanical inventory. 2 pyramids. The larger one rises approximately 55 meters above the forest floor, taller than any known Maya structure. 2 enormous pyramids, in a region that no published archaeological record associates with anything. You're looking at the capital of an empire that controlled more territory than any other political entity in the classical Maya world. Lundell published his discovery. The Carnegie Institution mounted an expedition. What they found contradicted everything academia believed about Maya urban organization. Structure 2, the main pyramid, covered a base larger than a football field. The city extended across 30 square kilometers. More than 6,750 structures were eventually mapped. The site contained 117 carved stone stelae, more than any other Maya site identified. The inscriptions named this city the capital of what epigraphers call the Khan dynasty, the Snake Kingdom. Researchers Simon Martin and Nikolai Grube spent decades deciphering Maya inscriptions across the Yucatan Peninsula and Guatemala. What emerged was hegemonic control from Calakmul over a network of subordinate city-states stretching from Belize to Chiapas, spanning approximately 1 million square kilometers. The Snake Kingdom installed allied rulers in distant cities, coordinated military campaigns across hundreds of miles, and managed the Maya political landscape the way an empire manages client states. In 562, Calakmul's military alliance struck Tikal, the other great Maya power, so decisively that Tikal's epigraphic record went silent. Inscriptions stopped. Construction stopped. The city contracted for 130 years. One military operation, organized from Calakmul, broke the competing power center for more than a century. The Snake Kingdom was not competing with other Maya polities. It was managing them. Here is the impossible element, stated plainly. When Spanish missionaries arrived in the Maya lowlands in the 16th century and documented Maya culture, history, and geography, Calakmul appeared nowhere. Not as a Rowan, not as a legend, not as a place name, not as a vague oral reference to a great city. The single most politically powerful city in the classical Maya world, a dynasty that controlled 1 million square kilometers for 7 centuries, had achieved total erasure from regional human memory within a century of its abandonment. This demands the comparison it earns. Other collapsed Maya cities survived in living memory when the Spanish arrived. Uxmal, Chichen Itza, Palenque, all remembered, imperfectly but continuously. Calakmul alone was completely gone. 700 years of political dominance over the Maya world, and not a ghost, not a rumor, not a fragment. The mainstream explanation is geographic isolation. Calakmul's remoteness, deeper in the jungle than other major sites, further from the northern lowlands where Maya population survived after the collapse, meant no one remained close enough to pass the memory on. The tradition died with the population that held it. Nothing was suppressed. The jungle was doing what jungle does, but the completeness of the erasure is what doesn't fit. Every other major Maya polity that collapsed left something in oral tradition for the Spanish to find. Calakmul, the largest, most powerful, most politically connected of them all, left nothing. The jungle didn't just cover it, it swallowed it. The 2016 LiDAR survey of the Calakmul Biosphere Reserve added 6,764 previously unknown structures to the site map. Most remain unexcavated. The reserve is one of the largest protected jungle zones in North America, and the hardwood canopy over the outer sections means the full extent of the Snake Kingdom's capital remains unmapped 90 years after Lundell's flyover. Professional guides working the excavated core make one consistent observation about the outer jungle zone beyond the cleared areas. The howler monkeys of the Calakmul biosphere, among the loudest animals on Earth, calls audible 3 miles away, fall silent above the sections of jungle with dense, unexcavated structures, not in the surrounding reserve, not in buffer zones, specifically in the unmapped outer ruins. The guides note it without drama as field information. In that jungle, above those buried buildings, the howlers don't call. How did the dominant political power of the classical Maya world achieve total erasure from regional human memory when lesser cities survived in oral tradition? What is in the 6,764 unexcavated structures the LiDAR identified in the surrounding jungle? And why, in the one zone of the Calakmul biosphere where buried human construction is densest, do the loudest animals in the forest fall silent? Calakmul was hidden by the jungle without anyone's intention. The last site on this list was hidden by the jungle by design, protected by the oldest continuous human guardianship on record, in a forest that has never been fully entered. Number 10. Chiribiquete. You're a Colombian Army helicopter pilot in 2019, flying reconnaissance over the Serranía de Chiribiquete, and the map in your cockpit marks this territory blank. Not unexplored. Blank. The notation for space. The mapping project declined to attempt. Below you are flat-topped Tepuy Mountains, rising from the Amazon jungle like fortresses that predate the concept of fortresses. Sheer sandstone walls, dark with moisture and age, disappearing into cloud at the top. And on those walls, visible from altitude in the morning light, are paintings, not in clusters, not as isolated finds. The paintings cover the cliff faces for kilometers in every direction, jaguars in mid-leap, human figures bending into animal shapes, deer, tapirs, fish, battle scenes, and thousands of human hands pressed flat against the stone in red ochre. The oldest possible form of human communication that needs no translation. The Colombian government has known about Chiribiquete since the 1940s. It has been formally prohibited to entry since the 1980s. In 2018, UNESCO designated the park, all 4.3 million hectares, larger than Switzerland, as a World Heritage Site under the title Chiribiquete National Park, the Maloca of the Jaguar. The designation recognized the site's global significance and confirmed its prohibited status simultaneously. The reason is stated plainly. Chiribiquete contains populations of uncontacted indigenous people, not contacted and resisting, uncontacted, groups maintaining complete voluntary isolation for their entire existence in the historical record, which is to say there is no historical record because there has been no contact. The Colombian government's 2019 internal census confirmed at least 2 distinct communities living inside the park, identified by aerial observation of their settlements and agricultural clearings. They are alive. They have homes. They clear forest for agriculture. They have never spoken to a government official, a missionary, an anthropologist, or a journalist. They are the living custodians of the world's largest concentration of prehistoric rock art, and their custody is not ceremonial. They are there. The paintings are what make Chiribiquete impossible to categorize. The oldest confirmed layers have been radiocarbon dated to approximately 19,000 years before present, placing human activity at this site at the height of the last glacial maximum, when the Amazon was significantly drier and the human presence in South America was, by the accepted archaeological model, extremely sparse and recently arrived. Some researchers analyzing the stylistic layers and superimposition sequences in the oldest sections propose dates in excess of 70,000 years before present. Here is the problem those dates create. The accepted chronology of human settlement in the Americas places first arrivals via the Bering Land Bridge at 15,000 to 20,000 years ago. A 70,000-year date for human artistic activity in Colombia is not compatible with this timeline. It doesn't revise the timeline, it destroys it. The older estimates remain contested, not refuted. They exist in the scientific literature as unresolved evidence. What the paintings show across all layers includes fauna extinct for thousands of years. Paleoecologists examining the imagery have identified what appear to be giant ground sloths and ancient elephant relatives alongside species that still inhabit the region today. If those identifications are correct, human observers at this site were recording animals before those animals went extinct at the end of the last ice age. The paintings are not mythological. They are observational records. Someone was here, watching megafauna that no longer exists, recording them on cliff walls that are still standing. The Carajona people, a contacted indigenous group living in territory adjacent to the park boundary, maintain a shamanic tradition describing the Tepuy Mountains as the home of Tsononique, the cosmic jaguar, simultaneously the creator and the consuming force that ends worlds. In Carajona cosmology, the Chiribiquete tepuys are the physical location where the energy of transformation concentrates. Entering without the jaguar's permission, transmitted through proper shamanic ceremony, means the jaguar enters the intruder. The Carajona don't offer this as warning. They state it as physical description, with the matter-of-fact precision of people describing a property of a place. In 2020, scientists analyzing satellite imagery of the Tepuy Plateau surfaces identified geometric anomalies consistent with human-made structures. The analysis was referenced in Colombian Environmental Ministry documentation. No ground survey has been conducted. The people who may have built those structures are still below them, living in communities that have never been contacted, holding whatever knowledge they carry about those paintings and those plateaus in a language that has never been recorded by anyone outside the park. They are not remnants of a lost civilization. They are a continuous living tradition. Whatever they know about the 70,000 hands pressed into those cliff walls, about the megafauna they may have watched disappear, about the structures on the plateau surfaces, that knowledge is alive, held in memory, spoken in an undocumented language, in a forest that has never been fully entered. These 10 sites span 5 continents and at least 19,000 years of documented human presence. What connects them is not age or geography, it is their refusal to be completely known. The White City infected those who found it with a disease concentrated in its own ruins. Nan Madol was built from 750,000 tons of basalt by a dynasty that left no dead and no explanation. Cueva de los Tallos held something that the first man on the moon ranked above the moon in personal significance. The lost city of Z consumed its most qualified searcher and then turned out to be real. Koh Ker was built as an instrument of cosmic dissolution, completed and abandoned in 23 years. Gran Pajaten was left watching by a people whose genetic origin remains unexplained in the scientific literature. The Amazon earthworks prove that an empire of millions was erased so completely that the jungle itself became the cover story. Paititi may still be guarded by living people who chose to remain absent from history. Calakmul ruled the Maya world for 700 years and vanished from human memory inside a century of its collapse. And Chiribiquete may hold the oldest continuous human presence in the Western Hemisphere, still guarded by people who have never decided to be found. Subscribe if this changed how you look at a jungle. Like if any of these made you question what else is still out there. And tell us in the comments, which one are you going for, if the permits ever get approved?